It's now time for part 2 of my Batman Joker build. Well, what you're looking at now is the Batman figure after having reapplied the base coat. I actually attempted to paint on the shadows and the highlights with a brush, just trying to blend the colors together, and really was not happy the way things were turning out. Here's some short video of my attempt. And, you know, I kept going at it and really just wasn't happy with what I was seeing. I was getting a little frustrated, so I decided to stop and step back and ended up reapplying the base coat. And what I've decided to do now is to take a different direction with this and just rely heavily on my airbrush to finish this part of the project. I've got other projects waiting, and I do intend to continue to practice on doing this with just hand brushes, but you know I can do it with an airbrush by pre-shading all the shadows, and then after that applying the highlights with the airbrush as well. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do, is finish most of this up with an airbrush. There'll still be some hand painting with some other things with the cowl and the cape there, but yeah, I think I can do a better job with the airbrush. So one of the things I did come across as I was just trying to rethink this whole process was I actually did some searching on YouTube for other builders or figure painters to see if they had any other hints, and there's just one guy which I will leave a link for. He did this Batman figure, did a really tremendous job. Actually, he does all kinds of figures, and you know, this is a technique that he basically uses. So let's proceed with this, and hopefully everything will work out. Much better here. The process was applying the shadows first with a very dark gray, and I actually even touched up some areas with black, and then moved to the opposite end of the spectrum, applying some of the highlights, and that was done with light gray mixed with a little bit of black. And then for the brightest highlights I used just light gray, pure light gray, and then the final step was to mist it over with the base color of Vallejo's light gray, which is a bit darker than Tester's. So this is how he's looking, and what I'm going to move forward with now is painting the bat symbol, and then we will move on to the cape and cowl and gloves. So not the easiest thing to mask, but it didn't take too long. Actually, with the use of these French curves, as you can see, I just matched up the curves to whatever side of the symbol I was masking, and just used my X-Acto knife to cut out the masking tape, and you can see they worked pretty well to create the curves that we needed. So I'm going to go ahead now and spray paint this black, and I'll show you when it's done. Okay, let's go ahead and peel this away and see what it looks like. Okay, well that's how the bat symbol turned out. I'm very pleased with those results. And I applied a little bit of a gloss coat as I mentioned, so that's looking pretty good as well. Okay, so what I've done here is applied a gloss coat just temporarily to protect the area that we've painted, because we're going to be now working with the blue. Just experimenting here, I chose this bright blue as our base, and so it looks a bit bright right now, but it will be darkened up as we apply the shadows, so it's not going to be quite this bright. But I think it's a good color, so go ahead and start with this. I'm going to finish painting his trunks here, and then we'll move on to the cape. So what I've done here, first of all, is applied a bright blue just with a brush, and then I'm going to go over this now with an airbrush. And I just figured it'd be easier to get in some of the tighter spaces with a brush first, and then we'll proceed with the airbrush. The paint looks a little bit bright right now. It is a bright blue, but we're going to tone this down as soon as we start getting the shadows in place. Well, he's coming along pretty well. I have the shadows now applied, as you can see, at least some of them anyway. And the darker color was created using the mixture of the bright blue, which I started off as the base. I toned the entire suit down with mixing in this midnight blue, and then I darkened that further to create the shadows color with this dark gray. So now that that's in place, I'm going to start dry brushing the highlights, which will accentuate the shadows even further. So for the highlights, I'm going to use this color from Vallejo, which is gray blue. Well, the blue-gray turned out to be a bit too light, so I'm going to go back to the bright blue, and I think that's working out pretty well. Well, I'm very pleased with the way things are turning out here. It was the right choice to switch to the bright blue versus using the gray blue for the highlights. This was a bit too bright, so I was able to tone those down with the bright blue, and it worked out quite nice. So I'm going to go ahead now and peel away all this stuff, and then we're going to go ahead and paint the darker part of the cape here, and then we'll move on to the belt. The belt was painted with Americana's True Ochre. And for the highlights, I mixed in a little bit of Vallejo's Ivory. And the belt buckle was painted with Vallejo's Game Color brand Gunmetal, and weathered slightly with Vallejo's Silver. And I did a little bit of a wash with MiG Ammo's US Modern Vehicles wash number 1007, just to help out with the shadows. Well, this is how the belt turned out. I'm very pleased with that. And we're going to move on now to his face, and then finally the eyes. At least with the eyes, with this particular version of Batman, they just need to be painted white. So the base color for the face, I use Vallejo's Beige Red, and this was followed by the application of Salmon Rose for some of the highlights on his cheek and chin. So you're not going to be able to see this very much on camera, but the idea here is just to give him some variation in skin tone, because skin color isn't always just one color. So I've tried to do a little bit of shadowing here around the creases and added a little bit of lighter colors on the chin where the light would hit. And I think it's looking pretty decent. So for the teeth, I am using a mixture of ivory and a little bit of khaki because we don't want them, shining too bright. Not implying that Mr. Wayne here has bad teeth. Of course, he has more than enough money to have a good dentist, but we just don't want him to shine too brightly here. Okay, well, I can say Batman is all completed here now, and I'm very pleased with the end results. The colors worked out great, couldn't ask for better. I've applied now a dull coat to his suit and left the bat symbol with a little bit of a gloss to it. I applied a lighter coating to the cape and cowl. I did want it to have a little bit of a sheen to it versus the suit itself, so overall I'm very pleased. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set him aside now as we move on to the final stage, which will be the display base. I'm just going to show you how this is going to piece together. Along this back line, we're going to put this piece perpendicular here to this base, and we're going to use a couple other pieces to support this. This block I'm going to glue along the back side here, as well as a vertical post. And I'll also use some small little screws to give us a little bit more stability as well. So the nice thing about this plywood that I purchased at Hobby Lobby is that it is thin enough to be able to cut with an X-Acto knife. This makes it easy to use a straight edge, and simply by making a few passes on both sides you can separate the wood like so, and this makes it easier and faster than using a saw. Next, I glued on the support pieces on the back side, and I spray painted the little foot plates I'll be using underneath the base. Okay, so I now have holes drilled for where the peg is going to go that's going to hold the Joker's head in place. You can see I have the peg now glued into the back of the Joker's head. And then we have a hole to help center where Batman's going to go. There's going to be a screw that's going to help hold him in place, and we have a hole here for our support. So before we put this into position, we have to put our picture now. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into place. So when working with this adhesive vinyl, it's not necessary to make a cut all the way through the material. Keeping the surrounding sheet makes it a little easier to separate the decal that you will be applying. To apply the decal, I first began by aligning the top edge, then carefully separated it from its backing, avoiding any air bubbles, and making sure that the decal applied evenly and smoothly. Now after decal was in place, I did apply a clear UV-resistant matte coating from Krylon. This is just to act as a fixative for the ink and also will help with any smudging. So let me go ahead and set this aside. I want to now show you what else I have in mind for the display. Now the other detail I'll be adding here to the base are these little cityscapes. So what I plan to do is create these little stands that will be mounted one on each side of the base surrounding Batman. And it's supposed to just represent Gotham all around him. Now, these were created on Photoshop here. Photoshop has this custom brush feature which you can load up different brushes, and really what you end up creating are these little stamps. And so what you do is you just color in your background, and just with one click you can put in a cityscape just like that. So that's what I did here. I just stamped it in, and then just made some cutouts for windows and just created some of various colors just to show some depth there. So I did my best to match the colors and tones of the larger print. Each piece was cut to a length of about 5 inches, and the top was cut and trimmed to match the rise and fall of the buildings. So in order to attach these, I created a little wooden base for each one. I purchased this piece of wood at Hobby Lobby, which was easy to cut to the appropriate length. Each one was painted black, and I made sure that I matched the 2 sides that the glue was going to be applied to. Okay, so we are getting into the home stretch here. What we've got going on now is some finishing touches to our base. So we have to add the feet, but also what I'm going to do is add some texture. Because you can see the wood grain here, I thought it really would take away from the display. So what I got a hold of was this stuff here from Testors. It's called Create FX. It is their gravel gray formula. And when you spray it onto a piece of wood, let me just get this from back here, you can see it looks like this. So it was painted black just like our piece here. We spray it on and it'll come out just like this. And I think what I'll do after it's dried is paint it black again, so at least you have some texture there going on. I think it would look better than leaving it this color. So we have our stands here with the cityscape, and I decided not to go around the entire perimeter because otherwise it starts to look like a... My daughter looked at it and she said it looked like a fence around him. So this is just to represent the city that is around him. Gotham, of course. I'm going to put them into 3 places right here. And so now that I have them marked off, that's why I needed to get these wood pieces on here before we did anything else. I can mask this off so that when we apply this stuff, this surface will be free for our adhesive to hold on to. Okay, so we have our surface now textured and ready to go. Everything's nice and dry, and when you spray it, it just splatters over the surface, so you have to apply a few coats to get a nice even texture. So this is ready to paint black, so that's what I plan to do is paint it black, and then once that is dry, I will attach the back piece here. Then I'll put the Joker's head in place, followed by these guys, and Batman will go in last. And I always like to put these underneath the display base just to give it a little bit of elevation there, so it's not just sitting by itself here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed with all that, and I'll show you the completed project in just a second. Alright, so I'm very excited to show you now the completed piece. I call this Batman's Torment. So very, very pleased with the way everything turned out here. Again, this is my submission for the SciFiFantasy.com's Halloween group build. Remember now, I was originally going to be doing a buddy build for this project with my friend Mark Fraley, but we had to postpone it because he's been working on another project. But we will be doing that in November, so that will be my next build coming up here. In the meantime, you know, when I was trying to come up with something for this Halloween group build, I went out to my model stash and I pulled out these guys, which I had planned just to use for experimentation with, you know, just learning how to do some more figure painting. But you know, it's funny, I just laid them side by side on my workbench. That's when this idea of pairing them together came to me. So again, these were unpainted resin figures that I purchased earlier this year at Wonderfest, and the Joker's head measures about 4 inches high, while Batman comes in at almost 7 inches. The detailing and cast is very good, considering that these were inexpensive purchases, both under $15, and were purchased at the closing of the show. So, turning briefly to the Joker here, the colors used for the Joker are, of course, very familiar to us. The green hair, green eyebrows and eyes, along with the bleached white skin. The sculpt has him posed with that classic evil laugh, and the painting, shadowing, and detailing really brings out all of the contours in this sculpt. There wasn't too much cleanup necessary, actually, just a little bit on his hair. Most of my time was really spent with painting. My goal with this build was really to try to work on my skills of hand painting. I've come across a number of people who are very, very good at this, and they do it all by hand. They don't even use airbrushes. So, it's just my goal to try to learn more of that. And for the most part, I was able to do that with the Joker's head. So let's turn now to Batman. Again, another fairly clean sculpt. Some work, of course, was needed with covering the attachment points of the limbs, and this gave me the chance to use epoxy sculpt putty, which worked extremely well. I had used a little bit of that in the past, but nothing to this extent, and it was very easy to use. I understand why so many people use it. I definitely look forward to using this stuff in the future. The classic blue and gray paint scheme works really well, as this looks to be in line with the Jim Lee version of the superhero. And if you go back to part 1, there is a statue I have in my collection that I used as a guide for painting this, although my colors are a little bit more vibrant than that statue. So stepping back now and looking at the entire vignette as a whole, the scene depicted here shows Batman moments after an explosion had occurred somewhere down below in Gotham. And Batman, of course, instantly knows who's behind it, and he can't help but hear that hysterical mad laugh of his greatest nemesis, the Joker. And positioning the Joker over his right shoulder works perfectly along with Batman's intense expression. You can almost feel his frustration and anger. So to add to the whole scene is the backdrop here. It was just a stroke of luck finding that. Again, this was just an image I found online when searching the words Gotham Skyline comic book. And to further add to it, I enhanced the scene with these pieces along the perimeter here that I made to surround Batman, depicting the skyline of the famous city, Gotham. And it's actually also a nod, a little bit of a nod anyway, to one of my favorite versions of the superhero, the Batman animated series from the 90s. And so I was just inspired by Bruce Timm when creating these. He always had these very sharp looking designs. And by the way, I had also intended on adding a couple more details, which would have been 2 more heads of the Joker. What I did was I found images of these heads online, and I just cut them out and put them on the vinyl sticker paper, and they were going to be floating behind Batman there. And one was going to be the animated series Batman, and the other one was going to be a drawing of Heath Ledger's Joker. But after kind of positioning them in place, I felt it was going to be a bit too much, so I decided to leave them out. Okay guys, well, that pretty much wraps it up for this project. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at nshuttermodeler@gmail.com. This is really a fun one to put together. It started off with 2 figures, of course, and that's always fun to paint and detail them, but also it's fun to come up with something that's going to enhance the figures in form of the display base. And I can tell you I was really inspired by a lot of this stuff that I saw at Wonderfest. It's what prompted me to purchase figures to begin with. So if you ever get a chance to get to Wonderfest, no doubt you'll be inspired too. I'd highly recommend attending that show. So real quickly before we leave, I wanted to talk about HobbyLink International, and that is where you'll come across Sci-Fi Annecy. You can also type in sci-fiannecy.com to get to it as well, but HobbyLink is a website that's put together by a friend of mine named Kenny Conklin. He does a tremendous job maintaining this website. It's something that has links to not only sci-fi models, which is what Sci-Fi Annecy is all about, but also if you're interested in model building, the military kind and civilian models, you can check that out too. There's a link for that as well. Also, there's a community page which can function as an alternative to Facebook if you want to get in touch with other modelers and find out more information about the hobby or other projects that people are working on. You can check that out. And along with the Halloween group build, which is just a fun group build he puts together, he also organizes the Model of the Year contest, and he's done that several times in the past. Amazing entries that get entered there as well. So check it out. It's HobbyLink International. I'll leave a link to the website below there. So thanks again for watching as usual, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.